Awesome. And now, please everyone, welcome the Angular core team. Pawel, Alex, Joost, Mathieu, Douglas, and Miles. Did you bring your microphones? Can someone assist us? We have a lot of microphones there. For the So thank you so much, by the way, for attending the questionnaire. We have compiled down a list of very interesting questions we want to walk through. Oh yeah. And well, I think I don't need to introduce you anymore.
Yesterday.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I think in the end it will be karaoke. Okay, so let's start with the first topic, which would be about style guide updates. That was one of the most highlighted questions here, and naming conventions. So whoever wants to answer, I will not point out who should answer, you just do your job, right? Can you explain a bit more about the reasons behind the removal of Angular suffixes in the new style guide?
Yeah, I guess I can take this one since we don't have Jeremy here, who would probably be the go-to person. So yeah, we recently overhauled the Angular style guide, and there were a lot of things in there which were kind of out of date or referred to, past ways of writing Angular didn't really fit kind of things like standalone or signals. But additionally, we wanted to remove a lot of friction from the style guide, to remove a lot of recommendations that we thought were just a little bit too rigorous and kind of contributing to this notion that Angular is hard or complex to learn. And as part of that, we removed the kind of recommendation that you should end components with the component suffix and have a .component file, directives with directive suffix, and so on. So we did this to make Angular kind of friendlier and more streamlined. However, it doesn't mean that you and your projects, if you want that kind of specificity in your file names, you can choose to use that. The style guide doesn't say, don't do this. It just says we don't have an opinion on it.
Did you already get some feedback around that? Like, do you know how people feel about that?
People tend to more tell us when they're unhappy with things than when they're happy with them. So yeah, there's been a lot of discussion. It is an ongoing topic. We'll continue to talk about it as a team and balance things out there.
Can I also just add, just to make sure people are aware, we do still support the old system for schematics. So there is, you can configure in your angular.json to have it keep generating the suffixes if you want to. So again, I do like Alex's framing that like it's not so much that we're saying don't do it. It's just that we're kind of pulling back our opinion on it to just kind of being more of a, do what you feel is comfortable. If that's something that you do want to enable, then feel free to do that.
Thank you very much. Next topic would be about reactivity. That's a tricky one because it also is a little bit of TypeScript discussion going on. It is especially about type narrowing. So when you are branching with signals, right? So if you want to check if a value is defined or undefined, and if you have an if condition and use a signal there, you do a function call, and then you are in a branch where you expect that TypeScript is now aware of the fact that there is an actual value, but you have to call the function again, and that doesn't really work. Is there some work in progress around that?
I think this is the question for me. I can say we tried. We tried a lot of things. Came up with various kind of interesting tactics to get around this limitation. But in the end, we decided or came to the conclusion that it wasn't really going to work, and we really need to have TypeScript support this better, where kind of calling a function doesn't necessarily mean that further calls of that function kind of don't have any narrowing effects anymore. So we tried our best and finally decided not to roll our own kind of workarounds to make it work.
Yeah, so we have an open issue with TypeScript where they are considering this, and they have other things on their mind right now. They're in the middle of porting their entire code base to Go, for example. But we do hope to kind of be able to get a resolution with them. There's some other use cases, some other people in that issue are kind of also arguing for having this behavior. So we will see. We went into the signals API design kind of knowing that that would be a friction point. There were kind of reasons why we wanted function calls to be the paradigm for signals, even if that was a problem. But we're hopeful that we can resolve this through like actual change in the language semantics.
Very well. So we can expect that this will be at some point solved, right?
They could very well say no, in which case, we'll have to look at other strategies or other workarounds. We do have @let in templates, which does make things a little bit easier if you have to go down that route.
True. Okay, fair enough. Thank you. A question about a very specific building block in the Angular universe that would be resolving around pipes. So now with the new Signal APIs, are still, like, people are questioning if pipes are still relevant for projects, and how do we now share formatting logic if we don't use pipes at all?
Right. So I think if we kind of like look at pipes that have been with us like for quite some time, like there are like at least 3 components of it. So like one is the like reusable formatting piece of code, right? Like, and from this perspective, I mean, we would remove them a long time ago, right? Like, because if you've got like a function, normal function kind of does the job equally well. So pipes also have this memorization strategy. Like if you use the pure pipe and use it in the template, then they will kind of like not overly, recompute things if recomputation is not needed. With introduction of signals, we would probably remove pipes from this perspective as well, because the computed is doing the same job of kind of like, making sure that you are not reevaluating things if not necessary. And finally, pipe have like the unique superpower that like if you use them in a template, they kind of get instantiated there. They can inject services and so on and so forth. And for this, we don't have a replacement. That's why we're kind of like not super aggressive about doing things with pipes. But having said that, I think like long term, we would prefer not having pipes. Just to kind of put it very, very openly. Mostly because that kind of like requires us to have special syntax and special construct in the expression language. And one of the learnings from the whole like LLM evaluation is that like the moment you've got special expression syntax, or like the moment you've got syntax that kind of resembles something, but it's not exactly the same thing, like LLMs kind of tend to be confusing. They are really trying to write TypeScript in Angular expressions. So I think our long-term strategy is to kind of have those expressions as close to TypeScript as possible. So yeah, like I think like if you don't like kind of use this special superpower of pipes, I think just like a regular function in a computed will do just fine.
Okay, so it's essentially really replaceable one with the other.
Yes, there are still just kind of like those kind of more niche use cases where they are special, but I think with time they will go away.
And how would you treat like cases, for example, with the date pipe, where you have to pass it arguments because you cannot pass an argument?
Right. Like, so like, so people will say like, hey, I cannot share computed because like it doesn't get the arguments and I need arguments. Well, just the share function, right? So interesting bit is that like even if we've got like formatting pipes, like date or numbers, we actually also exported a function that does the same, right? Like because people were like, oh, I've got this very useful pipe that does date formatting, but I cannot use it in my TypeScript code. Like it's kind of weird to invoke a pipe. So we also exported a function. So it's really a function is the way to go.
Okay, thank you. Next topic evolves around architecture and conventions in general. Man, that's one of my favorite questions today. What is really the preferred way for you or for the framework? What would you suggest to make HTTP requests in the future? Because now we are having HTTP resource, we have resource, we have RX resource. This is also when we do trainings for developers, sometimes just confusing for developers.
Yeah, and to make it even more confusing, right, there are different types of HTTP requests. You make requests to get data and you make requests to mutate data on the server. And I think the answer is different for those. So for fetching data, I think we would recommend, once it's out of experimental, of course, like HTTP resource is really the intended direction there, that you declare your data dependencies and receive them through the signal graph. To mutate data, mutation is not the same kind of operation where you want to kind of be fetching something reactively. You actually want to trigger a kind of intentional side effect that is not canceled when the user happens to navigate away from the component that's trying to do it. When they click the save button, you want that data to be saved regardless of whether they stay on the page or not. And in that sense, like making the request through HTTP client and using something like latest value from or last value from to convert it to a promise is a very reasonable way to approach it.
Okay, so there is just a reason for those 3 different APIs, and we want to just stick to those.
Yeah, so you can think of resource as a very primitive API, right? This is the building block of all of the other types of resources. And HTTP resource is just a specialized constructor for creating a resource that uses HTTP client under the hood. So if you want to make HTTP-shaped API calls, HTTP resource, if you have something else you're doing, like a WebSocket or a GraphQL query or something, the lower level resource is probably the right integration point there.
Okay, thank you. Sticking to the resource API, can it handle streaming with server-send events or WebSockets with WebSocket Stream API?
Absolutely, it can.
Okay, so this is just a clear yes. Awesome.
Yes.
Good to know. Then we leave the resource topic and, well, this is a special one. Are you still pursuing, because that was kind of already a topic for the future, are you still pursuing selectorless?
Yes. So I think like the full story with selector is that we absolutely see this as the kind of way forward and simplification of the templating, like kind of authoring experience. So we started selectorless project, and that specifically what we did, we went over the entire Google code base and looked at the selector types that people are writing in the component and directives, and what are the use cases. Because what we've heard partly with selectorless that maybe selectors are kind of this indirection layer, so they are kind of annoying. You have to write them, but they give you flexibility and power and so on and so on. So we really wanted to understand how people use this power, right? Is this just pure overhead, or this is just flexibility? And kind of digging and shifting through entire Google code base. We've got tooling that allows us to just kind of parse out all the selectors and so on and so on. I think I don't have exact numbers in my head, but there was just below 1% of all the kind of components and directives that were using special selectors. Right? Most components were using tag selector, and most directives were using the attribute selector. Then we're digging into this 1% of special selectors, and vast majority of them were using as the workaround for other deficiencies in the frameworks, in the framework. So based on looking at that, was okay, well, yes, they are powerful, but sometimes this power is used to kind of compensate for other things that we should have solved differently in the framework. So in this sense, we kind of did this step. And it's it totally makes sense as the way forward. Then the whole AI thing happened, and the realization was that being on this path of chunking changes is very incremental on those small steps is kind of counterproductive for LLMs, because we are presenting multiple kind of variations of the framework, right? So each kind of incremental step creates a slightly different flavor of the framework. From that perspective, I think we've got appetite to kind of maybe combine selectorless with some other changes, and that kind of ties back to the keynote at the numbers that Alex was showing from fake authoring format. That's kind of our experiment right now. We're just trying to see what else could we bundle with selectorless, and how LLMs are doing with this authoring format, right? And this is why those all ideas of evaluating things came to be. So that's the full story, which is basically yes, we want to do selectorless. We will probably bundle it with more changes, but we also want to understand how LLMs are doing with whatever we propose for the new authoring format. Sorry for the long.
No, it's totally fine. I guess people are interested in that topic. And so, but if I understood correctly, it will not be you ship selectorless and then all of a sudden the selector thing where you can really define special selectors, because in some cases they're absolutely needed at this point. Like you ship selectorless and then selector API goes away.
No. So like it always would be like, I mean, at the very minimum, selectorless would be instead of you specifying kind of mandatory selector for every component, you would have defaults, right? Like for component, it would be probably derived for the class name or something like of this sort, right? Like, because again, this goes back really to data from the actual code that people write, and most of the time, like they just will derive selector name from the component name, right? Like there is nothing interesting, there is no added value there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That makes me very happy that you are not destroying one of my favorite features. Coming to another topic, which is kind of a bit spicy. Does the Angular team plan to provide something like a native store, like a component store or a signal store? Like we see Angular is becoming more and more of a framework and more streamlined and shipping things out of the box, like making sure with the resource API that HTTP requests are shaped in a certain way. So we could also think about, would you come up with something that does state management for us, besides giving us the reactive primitives?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think right now the answer is that we don't have any concrete plans to do something in this space. We're kind of watching to see how this evolves. We talk a lot with the NGRX folks who are doing Signal Store and other state management libraries. So far, like if Angular were to do anything, it would have to be a one-size-fits-all kind of solution. We would have to cover the entire problem space. And that's not a set level of scope we're very interested in taking on unless there's a strong need for us to do it. And one such need might be the actual kind of AI future that we've been talking about. We see that LLMs benefit greatly from having a strong structure that they can understand in the application, and having a more defined kind of conventional state management system might be a part of that.
So you are thinking about it?
Yes. Yeah,
nice.
Thinking about it, watching to see what happens.
Okay, cool. Let's dive into forms. Will there be migration scripts for migrating from reactive forms to signal forms so that people just don't have to do it manually?
Yes. I think for migrating from like a reactive to signal forms, I think the mental models are pretty different, with signal forms being like the logic all being kind of purely declarative. So I think that would not really be something that we would be able to write a script for. We have played around with like, could LLMs help with something like this, and found some like promising results. So we may be able to do something like that. It would not be like 100%. You just run it and it's fine. It would be a run it and then fix whatever it didn't get. So yeah.
Okay, so we hope that we get something that covers a couple of cases.
Yes, you'll definitely not get a schematic that does it for you, though.
Okay. So, well, then we should, I mean, it's good for us consultants, right? So we can we can help people migrate manually. Amazing. Thank you for giving us work, really. So another topic about forms. If both form values and model values are writable, which should be used for manual state updates? Is one superior over the other?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. So I'll give you a short answer and a long answer. The long answer will not be over time, don't worry. The short answer is spend your time thinking about other things, I would say. Like, it is, either will work in like 99 point some number of 9% of use cases. It probably doesn't matter too much. There's a technical answer, which is that it's better to write through the form interface than it is to write to the model signal, because we can optimize a little bit more of the set of things that get recomputed there. And it is a bit easier dealing with the immutable set of changes, right? To write to a particular property versus deal with kind of replacing the objects at every level of the hierarchy in order to write to the top level model signal.
Thank you. That was really not so long. Yeah. Okay. So I take the short answer. Don't think about it. Just use it. Do whatever you want. Awesome. Let's move on to tooling, because yeah, I mean, some people really think that Angular is kind of last in line with compatibility to the Vite ecosystem. So, are there like any plans to make it more compatible, like Storybook integration, for example, or VTest?
Yeah, so this question obviously comes up a lot, and ultimately, Angular is a very different relationship with our tooling because we have a much more comprehensive story that we own, much more so than a lot of other frameworks that integrate with Vite directly and that kind of thing. We do work with a lot of our partners around trying to craft more out of the box experiences for these kinds of things. We meet with Storybook and a lot of those kinds of vendors to try to make sure that they're supported in these sorts of things. We do have on the VTest side, we do have experimental support for VTest. We are continuing to experiment there, trying to figure out the right unit testing solution to move for. So those are all things that are in progress. Beyond that, we don't have any immediate plans for any kind of drastic changes to the tooling story. But as always, we do listen to feedback. We do discuss these things, and this has been a recurring point of discussion within the team. And so it's something that we'll continue thinking about in the future for sure.
Yeah, I guess the most complicated part here is like really the collaboration with other teams and the partnership, right? To figure out how things in the end will eventually work. Another thing about it's especially VTest, there is an experimental VTest runner. Does it have a release date?
Sorry, what was the end of that?
Is there an actual release date to the VTest runner?
Oh, release date. No, not currently. We're still experimenting with a few different test runners because we have experimental support for VTest, Jest, and WebTest Runner. We're still experimenting with all of those to try to figure out what the best path forward is as a replacement for Karma. I know it's been taking a while there. The current thing that we're trying to figure out is just sort of making sure that we have a really scalable and polished migration story to make sure that this isn't something that becomes a big burden for applications that are still on Karma and trying to get over to the new test runner. So we're still trying to figure out what the best path forward is there. So there's no release date at this point. It's still something we're experimenting with and trying to make sure we make the best decision that leads to the least amount of churn and friction for all of your apps.
Okay, cool. I mean, that at least means you want to be sure that what you ship is actually helpful and good for us developers. Yeah, very well. That's what we like to hear. Let's move on to our most favorite topic, AI. Which AI model, in your opinion, generates the cleanest signal-based modern Angular code?
So we actually measured, and it's Gemini. No, I'm kidding. Gemini is good, but we actually plugged several models, and they are like all pretty good, to be honest. Right? Like I wouldn't choose the model on the kind of like specifically Angular signal like generation capabilities. They kind of like exhibit like interesting biases in some like funny ways, but like they are like absolutely excellent. And just going back to the morning talk, like just prompt, like this is the only thing that like really matters at this point. Just look at the prompt that we are publishing. Like those are not huge things, but sometimes just like one paragraph, like saying, hey, use signals. That's like by default, like this is your state management, and so on and so forth. It's enough just to have like really good kind of story with signals. To be honest, I was like, okay, how those poor things are going to like work with immutable data, like especially for complex data structures. They are totally fine, right? Like they have like, I guess, enough training from other immutable libraries. They are like absolutely totally fine with signals. So
they're far better at it than I am.
And I wanted to add the model especially most of them needs the context files. Like if you give them what we call the best practices document that you can find on our website. If you go on angular.dev/AI, we have an example of good practices that we feed to LLMs, and they improve a lot the result, whatever agent you will use.
Okay. But in the end, it means like you can choose whatever model you actually want. All of them will be decent Angular developers.
Yeah, and also like again, we measured, and the variance was like within like 1 or 2%. But like it wasn't like okay, this model was kind of slightly better. It was just kind of differently better in different parts of generation.
Mm-hmm. And just connecting on this question, how do they work with legacy code? Did you also like test that out? Because we work a lot with like very old, evolving, big Angular projects that still have a lot of legacy code, like ng module based, no standalone components, and stuff like that.
I want to say the context really matters. So we give you a context today, the best practices for V20. Just adapt it, just tell it that if you are on a V17, yeah, you still need to specify standalone true. If you want, I don't know, for whatever reason you want models, just tell it that you want more models, even if that's not the recommendation. Just give it the right instruction and it should give you the best output with the concepts you gave it.
Yeah, okay, but it's not really like that I want to continue producing more legacy code, right? It's like more how good is it at understanding that both concepts live in the app, because you have a couple of pieces that were already migrated to the new APIs, and then you have like a lot of legacy code also living just next to it. How does that work?
Yeah, I don't think we've done any like large scale hybrid tests, but in my experience, it handles it just fine. It can understand ng modules. It understands standalone. It can work in the code base. And if you give it the right instructions, as Matthew was saying, it will, you can tell it to write code in the style of the file that it's in, and it will know how to do that.
Okay, awesome. I mean, that sounds really great. And what about the MCP server? Because that was also specifically mentioned in the one question. Like, how does the MCP work within legacy applications that has started like ages ago?
I guess I'll mention currently the MCP server is really just providing documentation, and so it's mostly linking to V20 Angular docs right there. And again, like the vast majority of stuff is probably fine, but again, things like the standalone flag changing are things that might not work very well there. So your mileage may vary a little bit. We are considering adding other features to MCP, but probably not something that would be specifically supporting older versions. So I think at least since it is based on that documentation, that's probably going to be pretty specific to V20. So I think there's. But again, that is other things that you could modify with the prompt and say, you could say explicitly that like, yes, you do need to specify standalone true and that kind of thing. So I think that all still applies here.
So we are good.
Sure.
Nice.
Sure, good. Go with it.
Sure, good. Yeah, sure, good. And that leads us, I think, to the most philosophical question of this Q&A session. Do MCP servers and AI and code gen, which you already stated are actually good Angular developers, do they make us developers, and especially people who are new into the game or they think about getting now started with a developer career, are they obsolete now? Do we have to fear that no one has a job anymore?
Should we go down the line for this one? Like.
I don't know. You can each and every one of you can.
Yeah.
Like really, I think everyone has an opinion about that. Please shoot.
I guess I can say from my perspective, I absolutely see that junior engineers in particular are in a pretty weird spot right now, and I don't have a great answer for that. But I do see AI as being just kind of another layer of abstraction that gets put on top of the tooling that we work with. Way back in the day, we were punching holes in cards to try to program, right? And then at some point, we realized, hey, we could put this out into some assembly code, and we have a compiler. And then someday, we were like, hey, this is kind of hard to manage all this stuff. Let's make a higher level language that does this, and then an interpreter that does this, and then a VM that manages this. And it's the life of software is just continually increasing levels of abstraction. And I think AI is one more step on that. And so, the compiler didn't remove the software engineer, right? It's just shifted the way that we work. And so I see AI as very much in that same mindset of like, it's just another tool that we need to learn and leverage to meet our jobs a little bit more effectively.
I'll give a short answer. Last week I had a weird experience. I was on a plane. I didn't have any connection. I was working and writing a PR, and I just felt a bit slower without it. I mean, it just makes me faster to use my agents, get smarter completions, get a bit of chat for fast vibe coding. So it doesn't replace me, but makes me a more efficient developer, a more efficient engineer.
Yeah, okay, but you're also like a very senior developer, right?
Maybe.
Okay, understatement. Nice.
Yeah, so there are so many thoughts here. So like clearly those things are really good at writing code, right? Like I was like surprised and terrified at the beginning, right? Like because I think many of us got into the field of maybe like it's too personal, but like you kind of like create your own world and control it and kind of like create your abstractions and so on. So in this sense, programming is like really interesting, right? Like I think it speaks to many engineers. And with this LLMs, it's just kind of like, oh, this weird undeterministic thing arrives, right? Like so my old kind of, I create my world and kind of rule it as I want. Like kind of this gets destroyed because it's not deterministic. And on top of this, it wants to code. Well, like I like to code, right? Like so that's not a good thing. But like looking into it more and just like working on this eval tool, that was kind of good experience because they are more reasonable than I thought, right? Like, so you ask them nicely to write code and they will do. And sometimes they do weird things and you ask them to explain why they did the weird thing. And they come back with the reasonable answer. Like it's actually documentation was confusing or API was confusing. So in this sense, even if they are non-deterministic, they kind of force me to think more clearly somehow and just kind of get to the point and so on. So that's kind of my engineer kind of side of things was like, okay, I'm good, I'm saved. So I'm not sure if they're going to replace us, but for sure that the type of the job will be different. And it's fine, right? Like the Mike talk of like thinking about the new types of patterns and so on. I think we will just like spend more energy on like those completely new interaction patterns, just getting to the services that we need from applications faster. And I think that's the good thing.
Yeah, I think this is something we have to navigate as an industry. This tool is disruptive. It's changing the way things work, the way we work. And I think it will really cause the experience of junior engineers to shift. I think we are moving towards a world where AI generates kind of more of the code, and the engineer, as Doug was kind of saying, like moves up a level of abstraction, right, and is kind of functioning at a higher level. At the same time, we have compilers today. We also have people who build the chips and have to like design the instruction sets. There will always be this specialization of the person who kind of dips down below that layer of abstraction. But the question is like, what does the pipeline look like, right? If it takes senior engineers to kind of direct all the AIs, then where do the senior engineers come from eventually? And maybe we move back to like apprenticeship models, or maybe there's some other kind of pipeline that starts how you gain this experience to be able to do this. But I'm not worried that it's like the end of software development or anything. At least I think there's still a need, still a role to play for kind of developers leading the effort. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have long believed that artificial intelligence would catch up to human intelligence since even before the current LLM moment. I wasn't sure that would happen in my lifetime, but now I am about as convinced as you can get that that will happen in my lifetime. And so not just junior developers, but in fact everyone could theoretically be replaced by AI. But I think we don't necessarily have too much to fear from like current LLMs. Like that alone is not going to be able to replace humans. I think we still need, more breakthroughs and things. But I also think if you look at where it was 10 years ago, like could not form a coherent sentence to where we are now, and the amount of money being poured into it. Unless you believe the human brain is magic, I don't see how you do that math and come out thinking that it's not going to catch up to humans. But at that point, it's kind of everyone's problem, not just ours. Like, right, humans have no purpose anymore. We'll have to find something to do. So I wouldn't worry too much.
Yeah, I think Doug put it perfectly, where back in the day people used to write assembly, and nowadays that's kind of not something we do anymore. And we can also see AIs as being personal assistants. So instead of kind of searching through Stack Overflow, you just ask your question and you get a very personalized kind of teaching experience from AI. So they can actually be helpful to get you to a different level, even if you start kind of developing.
Thank you very much for all of your thoughts. Michael already signalized me. We have to end the session. We run a little bit of overtime, but I think we did a good job in answering all the questions. Thank you so much. Please, you can get your round of applause, of course, please.